Legends of the dance floor. A piece of paradise. Larry Levan's story.
Whatever happened to the day we met on King Street? All we ever wanted to do is sing and dance. Hey, yeah, maybe we could go back there and look for King Street. But sad as it may be, people, we never got the chance. Oh, whatever happened to the days we met on King Street?
Welcome to the first ever Legends of a Dancefloor documentary called A Piece of Paradise, produced by Lenny Fontana and myself, Eddie Gordon. Over the next 6 nights, we are going to tell you about a very special nightclub called the Paradise Garage in Manhattan, New York, and its DJ Larry Levan, how the combined forces of club and DJ changed the music business in an era that inspired many forms of today's popular music, including dance, disco, punk, rap and hip-hop, as well as being the motivation behind some of today's global nightclub brands. For example, the Ministry of Sound in the UK exists directly as a result of the Paradise Garage. Also, the success story of today's rap and hip-hop music has its roots at the Garage, as many of the first big hip-hop records were based on breaks from songs that were hugely popular on the Paradise Garage dance floor. First, in order to present the full picture, it's necessary to explain that this all occurred during an extremely difficult period in US history. The 1970s were often slated as the dumb decade by those who could not see the honey for the bees, because it was truly a golden era for music, much of which we still enjoy on daytime radio today and on the dance floors around the world some 30 years later. Strangely enough, but also typically in life, really, the American public's total distrust of their governing powers actually helped inspire enduring, creative and deeply emotional art, which outwardly reflected their growing disillusion with the fabled American dream. The decade's most important artistic and cultural icons collectively raised an upturned middle finger at all sources of authority, from the White House right down to the major record companies, and in doing so changed the direction of huge business brands who were trying to dominate popular culture. For example, the cult movies of the era, such as The Godfather, Parts 1 and 2, Taxi Driver, Mean Streets or Chinatown, all struck gold against the grain of the movie industry's conventional ideology, being gritty, narcissistic and without happy ending orchestral music. At the same time, social lyric songs were all over the radio, with Stevie Wonder, Living for the City, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, Curtis Mayfield, We Got to Have Peace, and Edwin Starr, War, What Is It Good For, all joined by an ever-growing underwave of new producers with artists wishing to express their disapproval of the times. What was their collective problem, you may wonder? Well, the world's most powerful nation experienced devastating times coming into that new decade after the 1968 assassinations of US Senator Robert Kennedy and African-American civil rights leader Martin Luther King. The US government was still entrenched in a face-losing war with the communist Viet Cong in Vietnam, which provoked, for example, 500,000 anti-war protesters to march on the White House in November 1969. Plus, serial domestic oppression of the population's constitutional rights caused trouble, including the socially challenging 1969 Stonewall riots in New York's Manhattan, after the New York police force again busted an event because men were illegally dancing together in the venue, though truly it was a police shakedown for their usual cash protection payoff, which that night was not forthcoming. Fast forward 42 years and gay marriage is now a legally accepted part of New York life. That revolution for change started on the dance floor with people wishing to dance to music together, as is their human rights. Anyway, enough of my meanderings. We need to begin tonight's show, and we do so with Michael Linder, a radio news journalist in Manhattan, New York, in that crazy 70s era, giving his true account of those days.
Hi, I'm Michael Linder, and I was a radio station news guy in New York City in the mid-1970s, working at WQIV-FM in New York and at WNEW-FM. 1973-74, the disco movement starts to move into New York. I helped a friend open a place called Galaxy 21 in Chelsea, which was a rather remarkable early disco in a couple of buildings. And at the same time, a couple of years later, by 1975-76, CBGB's had started to open. And so you'd go down there on a given night, and it would be Debbie Harry as a punk babe swinging her microphone at fans. I remember sitting around a table one night with she and Handsome Dick Manitoba and this new kid who had just blown into town and had signed a contract with Main Man for something like $120,000. When pressed what instrument he played, said he couldn't play one yet. So, well, I wanted to interview him. Well, I don't know that my label wants me to be interviewed quite yet. So, well, what's your name? Oh, I'm Johnny Cougar. It was Mellencamp, and fresh arrived in New York City, unable to play an instrument, but he'd been signed on his James Dean-esque charisma. These little loose threads were starting to play, and the rock establishment didn't like it much at all. Disco was considered frivolous. They wouldn't touch it. When I came back to WNEW with a story about this new music and came back with the first radio interview with the Ramones, they weren't impressed at all. They didn't want to hear about it. Let's just play some more Stones, This was corporate rock at its absolute finest. All of this was at a time when the city of New York was really going through its darkest days. A lot of things conspired, including a real downsurge in the stock market. The city on the verge of bankruptcy, and there's that famous New York Daily News headline, Ford to City dropped dead, when the city requested a federal bailout, in order to meet its city payroll. Crime was running rampant. There was corruption within the police department. Movies like Serpico were trying to reveal, how crooked the New York City Police Department. Crime was a real issue in the city, and it was forcing a major flight of families out of Manhattan and out into the suburbs. And by the time the 70s ended, 1 million people had left New York City. It was just seemingly imploding. At the same time, you had the Vietnam War, which had just left America clueless as to where its new direction should be. Where should it go? And so you had cults and religious revivals springing up all over Manhattan. You had born-again Christians, Jews for Jesus, Reverend Moon and the Moonies moved in with a vengeance to try to clean up the town. On the more esoteric philosophical end, you had Werner Erhard and Est taking well-heeled people for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by trying to teach them personal responsibility. People were completely clueless as to where they should go in the doldrums of the 1970s. And I think that any kind of new music that would come along, whether it was the Dionysian revelry of disco or the clean surgical punk rock movement that was coming along, where songs were 2 minutes 30 seconds, and where the Ramones said, well, yeah, it's got to come out of Queens because we're the only borough that's got basements, bands can rehearse. That sort of thing sort of set the stage. And really, I think it was the first fracturing of pop music in America. It had been top 40 segueing into FM album rock, and then suddenly the music went off in several different directions at the same time. Country was just beginning to kick in as well. So the first fracturing of the music industry at a time when people were philosophically at odds with the rest of the world seemed to be the New York experience of the 1970s. It was gritty, it was dirty, there were garbage strikes, it was a tough city to live in. New York was not the Times Square Disneyland theme park facade that we know today. It was down, it was dirty, it was gritty, there was all kinds of crime going on, and people were at a loss as to where to navigate, where to go, how to have a good time, how to really express yourself at a time like that. You looked at the movies that were coming out at about that time, and they were all fairly negative or fairly dark. Everything, Dog Day Afternoon being one of them, French Connection. This was kind of the raw edginess. And this lack of grounded spirituality, I think, had a lot to do with it. Look at movies like The Exorcist that came out. And I found myself in the middle of a fantastic one that was a house out in Amityville, Long Island, that was supposed to have, driven a kid to kill his family in an act of demonic possession. Turns out it wasn't, but I spent a night out there in the master bedroom and uncovered the fact that the family that had lived there and moved out on the advice of the Roman Catholic Church had done so in return for a book and movie deal. So it's a question of whether the demon in Amityville was actually had a taste for murder every time around, or whether a simple book and movie deal was enough to corrode people's souls. It was New York. And at the top end of the scale, you had some deluxe clubs. There was a place called the Blue Angel that was kind of out of the Marlene Dietrich movie of the same name. There were underground clubs starting to pop up along the river, but the big action was disco and then punk rock. And as a result of all of this, the traditional FM stations, NEW, PLJ, started losing audience as the mainstream music audience started to go off and explore other genres at a time of great uncertainty.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise. The Larry Levan story.
Larry Levan story.
Vince Aletti was the first person to write about disco in Rolling Stone magazine in 1973. Eddie Gordon has a telephone conversation to get his personal account of what the early 70s was like with the Loft and the Gallery, and as well, the birth of disco. So let's go to his story.
How incredible it was to witness the full blooming of the disco dance scene in New York City in that 70s period as a young man who was also entrusted with writing a weekly column, and in terms of the guys coming around to see you once a week, David Mancuso, etc. But just really what an incredible era that was.
I started writing that column years after I had been going clubs. I wouldn't have been able to write the column for Record World had I not already been pretty steeped in the disco scene, at least, and had some real sense of the music coming out of it, and kind of been following that for some years. That was most influential for me was The Law, but David Mancuso's Law. I had been going to clubs here and there before that and really been fascinated by the range of music that I was hearing, by the way DJs worked with that music. Primarily, I guess, because I was writing very regularly for Rolling Stone and a number of other magazines, and a lot of the records that I heard when I went dancing were completely different from the records that were on the radio or on the chart or that I was getting in the mail from major record labels. So it was clear to me, and what fascinated me from the beginning was that DJs were listening to and discovering music that was far from mainstream. And that kind of what first drew me to thinking about and writing about disco. It was a way of discovering music that I hadn't heard anywhere else. A great period for me, and I think for music in New York especially, to have range of very new records coming out of the clubs. And that remained, for quite a long time, a very underground scene.
Is it fair to say that New York City was really the epicenter of the whole disco movement? You had TK Records in Miami, you had Casablanca with Neil Bogart in Los Angeles, but the real beginnings of that whole movement came out of New York City. This was the mothership city.
Yeah, it was because Casablanca was later, at the height of disco. It was this very small New York label and New York DJs who kind of created a lot of the energy, or at least focused the energy. And, small labels like West End and Buddha, which was Neil Bogart's label before he went to Casablanca. Just a lot of record labels that didn't last for a long time, but that put out a number of amazing records early on. And, tons of import. I think it was really crucial to that early scene that DJs were so hungry for material that they were not satisfied with records that came out here. They were always looking for British imports, for African imports, for things from Spain and Latin America. That was, I think, very important, that there was this range of music from all over the world that I think really changed the sound here, because it became a much more international sound from the very beginning. And people were playing Barabbas, Manu Dibango, and just a whole range of things that were not at all pop radio.
The column you wrote weekly was called Disco Files. Can you just give a brief thought when it started, when it ended, and kind of what your duties were there?
Disco File was written weekly for a trade paper based in New York called Record World that was the prime rival of Billboard at that time. The column started in 74 and lasted until 1978. The main thrust of the column was reviews of pretty much every record that I thought was interesting or discussed in that period, along with charts, top 10 charts from 4 DJs from around the country, who I would call each week to ask what their most successful records were. And those charts were compiled weekly into a top 20. So it was basically, a series of pointed reviews, very opinionated reviews of new music, with the idea that I was writing for the DJ, not for the regular sort of rack jobber reader of Record World, but for the people who were playing these records and who were giving me information. The column could not have happened without the participation of a number of DJs all over the country who would tell me what they were playing, but also discuss with me what new things were coming out, what they'd been hearing about and not yet, been able to get their hands on, and all that information fed into the column, into being something I thought was, as current and on top of things as possible.
The loft into the gallery, into the Paradise Garage, there's a solid link between the way those clubs are run, not only as private member clubs. The bulk of this program is about Paradise Garage and Larry Levan because of the 5-hour tapes we've got from the second anniversary birthday party in 79 that was broadcast on WBLS with Frankie Crocker. The research we've done shows us there's a direct link going back from Paradise Garage to Nicky Siano's gallery, and that was influenced directly by the loft and David Mancuso. Yes. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think other people have a better overview than I do, but I know that Nicky was a big fan of David. The gallery was literally, for a long time, right around the corner from the loft in Soho. So there was a real exchange there, and also a real exchange in terms of the people who went to the club. And then Paradise Garage kind of picked up from both of them. And I think, it had a lot to do with the openness of all those clubs. That there were not just one particular crowd. It was a very mixed crowd in terms of race, sexuality, age. It was really, all those clubs I felt very comfortable because of their openness, and it wasn't like you were going to some place where everybody was the same. It was really very democratic in a lot of ways, and the sense that people kind of were drawn together socially, but also through a shared interest in music and dancing.
Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise. Larry Levan's story.
Nicky Siano, the owner of the gallery and resident DJ, sat down with Eddie Gordon and myself, Lenny Fontana, and gave us an account of what New York City club life was like in the early 70s. Right now, he's in the middle of promoting his new movie, A Night at the Gallery. So let's go to his story.
I started going down the Village with friends of mine, and I think I went to a place called the Firehouse. That was the first club I went to. I heard dance music, and immediately I knew I was drawn to it. I knew that was the kind of music I liked the best, and I started collecting. While going to little dance parties that I could find around, because I was 15 years old and there weren't many places to go, except if you were 18, you could go to a bar at that time in New York.
What year would that be?
That's 1970.
Yes, the 7-inch records.
Yeah. Mostly 7-inch, and yes, an album cut. Then I went to the Loft. And that night, the very first night at the Loft, I knew I wanted to be a DJ. Then in 1971, I started playing illegally at a place called Round Table, which was a club on 48th and Lexington, I think, or 52nd and Lexington, I'm not sure. And it was very big with this drag show kind of thing. I played for $15 a night, my pay was. $15 for Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and $20 for Friday and Saturday. And I was there about a year and a half. Went to my brother and convinced him to invest an insurance settlement in opening a club. Put together a business perspective, and we opened the gallery. $10,000. Still wasn't enough to open a club.
You did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, we did basically everything ourselves. $5,600 was the sound system. So, and Rosner was the guy. I mean, he was, when I went out and heard the sound systems, the best sound systems were by Rosner Custom Sound.
We've been getting some good imagery of New York in that period, from the sort of 71 through to 75. What are your recollections? Not just, maybe...
Besides the club scene.
Yeah, socially.
First of all, civil rights, a lot of people fighting for their own little causes, but unified, a lot of civil disobedience happening all over the place, and then seeing change aptly happen. Seeing people from no one being against the Vietnam War to almost everyone being against the Vietnam War to it finally ending from public pressure was amazing. But it was, people were feeling very empowered. I talk about this in the movie. It was a very empowering time, and the music sort of reflected that, especially the dance music. Brothers and sisters, you know, join together, spread the love epidemic, we can do it, we can make change. I mean, it was just blatant, you know, like, come on, you know, do this. It wasn't, you know, Disco Inferno. That came after. You know, this was strong messages about change and bonding together. As far as New York City went, it was empty. I mean, New York, Manhattan, you know, there weren't people all over the place like there are today. I'm downtown, where, first of all, the club initially was on 22nd Street between 6th and 7th Avenue, which is a totally commercial block. And they're all lofts on that block. Loft living had not started yet in that area. It had started just a little bit downtown, but very little. You could walk up that block anytime after 7 or 8 p.m. and not see anyone on the street at all, ever. I mean, and not only not see anyone on the street, but really feel like you were alone, like it was quiet. There weren't any lights on around. Apartments on the Lower East Side were $60. It was $60 a month to rent an apartment. A studio was like $40. One bedroom was $60. A nice 2-bedroom was $90 on the Lower East Side. And no one wanted to live there. There was ad after ad after ad in the Village Voice for apartments on the Lower East Side. So it was
Why?
It was very inexpensive.
Why didn't anyone want it?
Why? Because it was so dangerous. The Lower East Side. As a matter of fact, Manhattan itself was very dangerous. It was not the place it is today. If you rode the subways at night, there was sort of a 50-50 chance you'd be mugged. If you were alone. If you were with someone, there was still a good 25%, 30% chance you'd be mugged. I was mugged at least three or four times on the subway. Once during rush hour, during 5 p.m., I went down on 8th Avenue, 50th Street, the subway there, and it was empty, and someone came up behind me and grabbed the gold chain off my neck. It was just a common occurrence. The Lower East Side, forget about it. Walking there at night was like walking in the middle of Harlem, which was, you didn't do it. You know, guns to your head, knives to your back. I mean, constantly people being mugged. First party that I was talking about was on Worcester Street, the firehouse. And when you walked past Houston Street, you didn't see anyone. There was no one on the blocks. And you walked down there. Everything was closed. Everything was dark. I don't even think the street lamps were working. I mean, it was really deserted. And then you came to a door, and you knew the door, and you went in, and there were people in. But otherwise, I mean, no people on the street. There weren't any shops. You needed cigarettes, you'd have to go up to the Village, you know? And the Village, in the West Village, you could walk. There were people around. You know, there were certain areas. 42nd Street, very dangerous. And you can get any drug you wanted on the street, but I don't know if it would be real or not unless you knew the right people. It was really, you know, a very scary but very exciting place. I mean, it was really exciting. There were things happening in the city that just weren't happening anywhere else. First of all, the birth of dance music. I mean, it was just such an underground thing that people didn't like. They loved it. They lived it. It was the first time people were hearing this music. It was moving them profoundly. Before Stonewall, there was a law that same-sex people could not dance on the dance floor together. Until 1969, when the Stonewall riots happened, people didn't really open clubs, or gay clubs weren't really as packed because they got busted all the time, once a month. And it opened up a whole area where people could open up clubs, and people started intermingling. And then gay people and straight people all went to the same clubs often because there were so few of them. So it wasn't like, a gay club here and a straight club there. No, it was the club, the party, everyone went. I always thought what David did was he created atmosphere. He didn't play records. He controlled the lights. He controlled the air conditioning. And I felt the same way. I felt like the music would have a much greater impact if the lighting was just right and the lighting man or I controlled the lighting and everything in the room worked together with the music. So when you're creative, things come to you. It's like I went home one night and I had a dream that I'm playing Girl You Need to Change Your Mind, going into Love Is a Message, and over that I hear this airplane sound effect. And I said, I need 3 turntables. And it was a dream. And I brought it into the club, and then everyone had 3 turntables there. I mean, I was like sort of coming up with these things as I went along. I felt like the dance floor, I had like an open room first at Gallery, and I said, no, this dance floor needs to be in a separate room so that when the lights go out on the dance floor, it's dark, it's black, you can't see the person in front of you. And then the dance floor was always in a separate room in our club, and that also enhanced the sound. So it just sort of, as you're given the clay, you start to mold, and then you find different things that you want to add on to it. And then there's a lot of other people around, like Frankie and Larry and all these friends of mine who were very, very creative, saying, let's do this, let's do that, let's paint this wall green and orange. And then the lighting will glow over here and here. And then you control it in the booth, and you can put it on 3 switches and go 1, 2, 3 like that. And it'll be really, really mind-blowing if we use it like once or twice a night. Stuff like that would happen all the time. And I guess LSD had a lot to do with it. I mean, when you're coming down from acid, that last 8 hours, the old acid, you used to just get into things and make things from nothing. And that's what we used to do. Sew pillows, paint walls, install lights, and just come up with things, I saw David had a thing going on. I wanted to make it more commercial, but I felt like David had this it was his house and everything, and I understood that, but I wanted it to be a party place. Not really a house, but a party place that felt comfortable, but was there more not because it was his home, but to blow your mind while you were dancing. I mean, everything designed to do that. Paradise Garage and Studio 54 were just blatant copies of the Gallery, especially the Garage, because Larry was with me all the time. Did I take it as a compliment? You know what? It didn't bother me. It was like everybody was doing that. People were copying each other and then expanding on the idea. And, actually, when it was done right, I didn't have a problem with it. There were maybe 40, 50 discos, and every one of them was packed on Saturday night, every single one. And everyone was playing the same records. Wasn't this one was playing that music. Hit and Run was like a hit for everyone. I mean, you'd hear a different record here or there, but basically everyone played the same music. There wasn't that enough music for everyone to play different music like there is today. So people who went out dance heard that song wherever they went, and often you would hear it 2 or 3 times a night, especially when it was new. You'd hear it 3 times a night and you'd say, I gotta have that record. And you'd go out and buy it. And then you'd turn a friend onto it and they would buy it. It was just from the clubs, just from the club play. It would hit. Same thing with Love's Theme. That's the same thing happened. David Rodriguez and I went down to Billy Smith's basement. I'll never forget it. There was Love's Theme with the 3 girls with the afros, and there was Standing in the Shadows of Love with Barry White, 2 big packs of them. And David Rodriguez said, what is that album? He pointed to the Love's Theme with the girls, the Love Unlimited Orchestra. He loved the afros. He thought it was so campy. He said, I gotta have that. And Billy Smith said to us, I'll never forget this. Oh, that's a dead pile. We're throwing those away. And we said, well, I like the cover. And he said, well, try this Barry White one. It's pretty good too. Well, it was Love's theme. David Rodriguez and I started playing it. Then Billy Smith got on it and gave it to every one of the clubs. It went to like 47 on the Billboard Top 100 without any airplay, and then radio was forced to go on it, and it became like a top 10 record. And I just never forget that. It just was, the clubs really ruled the roost back then. Soul Makossa.
Nicky, tell everybody how Soul Makossa happened and how it blew up in New York City.
I'll tell you the story. It was a record from Africa. Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn was the only shop that had Soul Makossa, and you had to get on the train and go down there. I bought 10 copies and brought them back to everyone in the city. Everyone went on it, and Soul Makossa becomes a #1 record. Soul Makossa. Woman.
Barabbas.
By Barabbas. Wild Safari. David brings home 10 albums from Spain. Says, check this out. Barabbas. It was a great cover. They changed the cover in I don't know why. It was a black and white glossy cover with that picture on it. It was great. And they changed it to this horrible, disgusting cover. But anyway, it was Woman and Barabbas. And we started playing it and they picked up on it. It was just record after record after record. And that's why the whole record industry started courting the DJ. Frankie was the first person to come to Gallery, and Robin was at the front door, my girlfriend Robin at the time, and she was at the front door, so she talked to people more than I did. And she talked to Frankie, and she thought he was a great person to work for us. And within the first week of opening, Frankie came to work for us. And within 2 weeks, he said, I have this kid, he's kind of crazy, but he's really good. Can I bring him next week? And I said, sure, we can use the help. We became really big really quickly. Like, the first week David closed, we had 600 people the next week. After that, it was 800. And we'd open Friday and Saturday night, and both nights, 800 to 1,000 people, both nights. So we needed more and more help, and then Larry came along, and Larry was a kid. I mean, he was my age. He was a year older than me. I was 17. He was 18. And Larry was very into fashion. We had this friend called Shamako who sewed all his clothes for him, and he would wear all these wild designer clothes that were just, like it was a shirt with a big red spot in it, and then the pants would have red spots on, and they would be sewn on, and it was just wild shit like that. And he'd wear his clothes, wear them and he became fascinated by the first thing he was drawn to was putting up the balloons, not blowing them up. He didn't want to blow them up. Frankie would sit there and blow them up. He would want to put them up because he liked to design the way it looked, the dance floor. And he really, he would think of things to do so that, if the lighting shines this way, these balloons will light up this way. And he would just get into the kind of, layered thought behind creation and artistic vision. He loved doing the balloons, and then slowly he wanted to work lights because Robert De Silva, who was my light man and very, very good, would want to be at the loft on Saturday night. So Larry worked the lights. And it was years before he became a DJ. I mean, way down the road. This was 1973 maybe, 72, 73. He didn't become a DJ until 75. So it took him a while, it took him a while. He was hanging out, he was having a good time, we were all hanging out. He moved in with me, we became roommates, and we were roommates for years. And then he started hanging out at the Continental Baths. And he just became really good friends with Joey Bonifiglio, who was the DJ there, and he used to work his lights. And then Joey up and quit. And Steve Ostro, who's the owner of the bath, said there were two people, Larry and someone else, and he said, well, whoever gets a record collection could come in and be the DJ. And Larry went around to all my contacts, put together a record collection, and became the DJ there. But we already had started, like, he would come to the gallery on a weekday and he would say, can I play records? And I'd say, sure. And then I would tell him all the things that David Rodriguez told me. Don't cut off the singer, don't cut off the words. Let's hear I want to hear the first beat of the record and the last scream of the vocal, or, stuff like that. And we would just play, and he'd play. We all danced. I mean, we would go out Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday and work Friday and Saturday. Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday we were at Hollywood, or the Limelight. But even before Gallery, we were at the Limelight all day. Not the Limelight on 6th Avenue. This was on 7th Avenue South. DJs who don't dance or never went out dancing. To this day, I danced in the DJ booth,
Nicky, can you describe to us a night at the Loft through your eyes and what it was like?
Absolute magic. First of all, the room, his dance floor, it was 1.5 times this length and back to my kitchen wall. So it was not, right where my bedroom is, and then that wide. It wasn't that big. It was like a real living room, And the sound was like wearing headphones. It was so close. It really was. And then he installed these tweeter arrays, which were his ideas. And no one had ever heard anything like that. We would just, all of a sudden, girl, you need to change your mind. I'll never forget. Eddie Kendricks goes, oh, and then the big break. And he'd turn on the arrays, and you'd hear, and he'd turn off all the lights, and you were in darkness, and everyone would scream, and it was just so intense. In the movie, Frankie says the gallery dance hall was like being in a womb. It was like that. It was very close, and everyone, you hit into someone, they smiled. And there was a little bench around the edge of the dance hall, and everyone would sit, and everyone else would dance, and you wouldn't stop dancing. And the lighting was perfectly timed. I mean, a light didn't change for nothing. Ever.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise. The Larry Levan story.
Eddie Gordon and myself, Lenny Fontana, went to meet with Judy Weinstein at Def Mix Productions. Today, she is the manager of David Morales and Frankie Knuckles. But back in the early 70s, she started out as secretary for David Mancuso's New York record pool and also created For the Record, which became the #1 record pool for many years. So now, let's go to her story.
I had dinner with Vince Aletti last night, and it was Vince that actually introduced me to David Mancuso when David Mancuso was looking for a new secretary to run the club. I'd already been going to the Loft since it was on Broadway in 1971, 70. So I was thrilled to leave the working world and actually work and help run a club that I had been going full time. But it wasn't a normal workplace by any means. And David Mancuso was extremely creative in time management, and it was a lot of fun as opposed to working in a 9-to-5 cigarette company, which is where I work.
Okay.
Anyway, so I became the secretary of the club. I got very involved in the parties, and the record pool was already going on, and I had nothing to do with it at that point. It was just creative, and that was New York Record Pool, and that's where Vince was involved. But I had known Vince from going to the clubs earlier.
Can you explain why Record Pool started?
A few DJs got together, Tony Gio, Bacho Mangual, just a few of the guys that were going up to the record companies and just driving them nuts, to give them records. They needed product. So David Mancuso and these other people, like Vince, they got together and they said, well, what can we do to make this easier so the guys don't get rejected by the record companies and that we get the product? So they devised a system where, okay, you give us X amount of records, we give it to the guys, we get you feedback, and it's a free promotional service in reality, and the companies were thrilled no longer to have crazy DJs going gimme, which is what all DJs still do. Everybody wants their record.
Also, the records were then put out on time in a pattern.
And they were 7 inches and they were out. There were no 12 inches at that point. That was developed. And so that was why record pools were created, to make it easier for the DJs to get their records and more peaceful for the record company. And people like Sylvia Rohn, who's now the president of Motown. I mean, there was a record label called Buddha, and she was a local promotion person. There was John Brown, who worked at ABC. It was all the folks that actually became my very good friends as the years went back. But Dave German came later. He was second generation. But the first generation actually, helped establish record pools. And Mel Sharon, as well as Ray Caviano, who was one of my mentors. No one knows where he is anymore. He disappeared, but he worked at TK. Billy Smith at Salsoul, Mel Sharon, they created the business in a way, the dance music. There was one in LA, I think.
To promote the records?
Yes. Well, not really. It was created for the DJs to get their records.
I'm asking simple questions because people will hear this at 19, 20, have no idea what a record pool is.
That's fine.
Well, the record pools existed to help the record companies promote the new records.
But see, that sounds nice, but that wasn't why they were created. They were created so the DJs would have their music. It was purely selfish, and the price for that was to give the record companies the feedback they needed to go back to their vice presidents and managing directors to say this record is a hit. And then they would put out the single or the new version.
Or put out the B-side, that's more popular.
Or put out the B-side. That happened many times.
Yeah. Going back into that 71, 72 period, that we've asked this question to a lot of people about the feeling in New York at the time. The way society was at the time. What you have, because you got post-Vietnam, post the Dan Ellsberg tapes, post-Watergate, and there's a kind of sense of liberation coming in the city.
But there was an entire underground scene that was going on that the police never knew about, that attracted all of us. I mean, I was going to the Loft in 1971. There was the 10th floor, which catered to a different kind of a crowd that was operating in 1971. But there were also the legitimate discotheques that started with Regine in Paris, that suddenly we had Hippopotamus in New York and Artis and all these places from the late 60s through the early 70s. And Adam's Apple. And there was a lot of clubs that were functioning above ground.
Right.
So the scene was good. Yeah. The scene didn't collapse until Giuliani took over. Exactly. That's when it collapsed.
So it felt like in that period, early mid-70s, that all these roads merged together. So you got the liberation, the racial liberation, the sexual liberation, and also the liberation from Vietnam's over now. Nixon's gone, Joe Ford comes in, Carter comes in after that. A different feeling in that. And these roads all merged together with this music blossoming up.
It was a funny time. Fair, I had been to Woodstock for an afternoon in the late 60s. I burned my bra. Really, I need them now. I needed them then. I don't know if that had anything to do with the emergence of the scene.
Legends of the dance floor, a piece of paradise. Larry Levan story.
We met up with the godfather of the 12-inch, Tom Moulton. He is a legend of legends when it comes to mixes, especially from the early part of the disco scene. He's mixed more than 5,000 records in his career and has a lot to tell us. So strap yourselves in and now take a listen to Tom Moulton.
The worse the sound of today gets, the more people want to go back to where it meant something musically. And it's like when people ask me to do things, I say, if you're looking for me to mix something, if you think I'm going to reproduce it, I don't do that. I take what exists and, that's what we want. We want the music to sound like music. And I went, it's going to stand out with today's thing. Oh no, that's what we want because that's what other people want now. I went, okay, that's fine. And I think that's why, I hate to use the word I put out an album and it was only supposed to sell a certain amount. Well, it sold a lot more, but it's because it's music and they thought it was only going to go for DJs and people who are disco nuts, but it spread farther out and they didn't know why, and so they finally figured out why it is.
My first question today, Tom, were you the first writer for Billboard USA to produce a weekly column about disco dance music? If so, how did that come about? And would it be too cheeky to ask, what were you paid?
Sorry, that's funny. God, I think even Mexicans got paid more than I got paid. It's illegal.
It's illegal, right?
Got paid. The first thing they told me, writers don't make much money. And I said, yeah, I could tell by this check. I think I was getting like $50 a week. It was ridiculous. A man named Mel Sharon, who I was a close friend of, called me and said, Tom, I have to go to Boston this weekend. Is there any way you can take the man who does the charts for Billboard around to a couple discos? Because he wants to know what they're like. And I went, well, what kind of discos do you want me to take them to? And he says, no, we'll take them to the good discos where it's music. I said, well, I mean, if you want to take them to it, then I have to take them to a couple gay clubs then, because that's where the new stuff is, where, you know, they're not playing stuff that everybody knows. They're playing, like, new stuff that nobody knows. He says, no, take them there. So I took them to the Limelight. David Rodriguez was there, and that's when DJs were stars. Said hello to him. I said, you know, Bill Wardlow, you know, from Billboard magazine. Yeah. Well, he was in a bad mood. So he got on the microphone and said, you know, I'm in a bad mood tonight, so if you want to go to another club, leave now. Then these guys were, it wasn't the music that was star, they were the star. And they played what they wanted to play, and if you didn't like it, then go to another club. Banging on the glass, you're fired, leave. I'll leave when I'm through. So anyway, and so Bill is looking at me saying, this is how they act in disco. And I said, well, David's kind of unique, you know. But anyway, he's a good DJ. So anyway, he was playing a song called Make This a Happy Home by Gladys Knight and the Pips. And nobody was dancing to it. And he said, well, unless you get up and dance to it, this is all I'm going to play all night. And then finally, after the 10th time he played it, people all got up and danced. And then he goes, okay, once more, but with more enthusiasm. And then they kept saying, rain, rain, we want to hear rain. So for about 15 minutes, all you heard was... And then all of a sudden... All of a sudden you heard Date with the Rain, and everybody started yelling and screaming. But that was enough where Bill Wardlow understood the power of, like, people, seeing people having a good time to music. And then he said, you know, would you like to do a weekly column? I said, a weekly column? What do I know? I'm not a writer. And he said, well, we'd have somebody ghost it for you, you know, you correct everything. I said, well, I'll try. I said, I'll just talk about the music. I said, but I won't say anything negative, because I'm trying to, you know, build disco rather than tear it down, you know. But it didn't take long for those other guys to, you know, put the screws in. But anyway, I was trying to be very positive at the time about disco and everything. I started Billboard was the first, and then I guess it must have been 2 months or 2.5 months, then Record World started a column with Vince Aletti. So
Brian Chin, Larry Flick and Michael Paletto all continued down the dance path that Tom Moulton built inside Billboard magazine, really.
Well, actually, they all followed me. All the ones you mentioned were at Billboard. You know, Record World's out of business by then. Yeah, because the guy who followed me after Billboard was Barry Lederer.
How long did Tom Moulton's disco column stay in Billboard magazine?
I think 3 years, I think.
Do you think your column in Billboard gave you an advantage as well, from the precipice looking down on what was coming in?
I was in an odd position. I had to write about disco, and yet I would never write about music that I did, because I thought conflict of interest and payola. And, you know, when they said, oh, well, everybody knows how you are, Tom, so you could talk about your stuff, and they'd know you weren't taking money for it. And I went, they do? But I did, I reviewed my records like trying to be objective, and I thought it was an interesting way of doing it. And not one person ever said to me, like, oh, you're writing that because it's your record. Because a lot of records I did, I wouldn't even talk about.
A technical question for the BBC listeners. Can you please explain Tom Moulton's theory about the third beat in the bar?
I said there's actually 8 beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There's 8 beats you can actually get in. The trick is, I watched people, I was watching them, and they always leave on 1. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So if I start something before 1, so by the time it gets to 1, they're already dancing to it, they won't leave. And they didn't. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Dun, 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 dun. So you already got them. So you're getting to do that. So I got them on 4 and. So the minute 1 hits, they're already like into it. Da, 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 da. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, da, da, da. Follow me? So that way they're already dancing to it. So why? So they're not going to leave unless the DJ screws up, and which a lot of times they did. And that's when I said, oh, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Which song was your first ever remix?
Well, the first one I never like to talk talk about. I denied it for years, only because I thought I really didn't know anything. And that was a song by the Carstairs called It Really Hurts Me, Girl. And I denied I did it for a long time. And part of the reason was I really didn't know. I really didn't know about mixing. I knew how I wanted to do things, but I really didn't know about EQ and do that. But I never thought anything would happen to it, and it became a big cult record in the UK. Well, I did it in 1973, and the record didn't come out till 1975, but it came out as a remix. The first mix I did for them was Dream World, Down Down, and Lonely Days and Lonely Nights. I also mixed that one too. Then they liked it. Lonely Nights. Oh, I love that record. I have no idea how much I love that. I did his brother Al too. I'll Be Holding On, Al Downer. Now, what happened was Mel played me this Brothers Truckin', that was Do It Till You're Satisfied, and then I said, Brothers Truckin'? I said, what is this, like a tribute to Eddie Kendricks? What is this, Brothers Truckin'? I said, why don't you name them like a Subway or something if it's a New York group? And that's where the name BT Express came from, but the BT still stood for Brothers Truckin'. You know, and then let's say the only place to go from there is down after you have a #1 record. So
we had a few #1s after that.
Oh, we own quite a few, yeah.
In that incredible period for dance music, which DJ in the New York scene did you consider to be the most talented or influential of his time?
I like this DJ named Jimmy Stewart. I like how he played music. He played at a club called 12 West, and he died. He died in a fire, unfortunately, but he was so talented when it came to music. He felt music and he understood music, and he would play it in such a way where it would get the biggest impact for the song. And I didn't know many DJs who would play like that, and he kind of analyzed it, and he was a bright guy, bright guy. And he approached it logically, and words from the song before set up the words for the next one. It seemed like it was simpler what he was doing, but it was really very complicated what he was doing. But he was great at it. He really was, and I had a lot of respect. I liked him a great deal.
Which remix took the Tom Moulton name from New York City to being internationally renowned?
I don't think it was one as a matter of so many of them. I mean, seemed like they were coming out one a week or something. I mean, because my name was on so many records at one time, no one ever did that before.
So nothing particular, not one record you think that's big?
Well, I think the concept of Gloria Gaynor, you know, the BBC, when they did that, this is a number of years ago, they asked me what was the first 12-inch I did. And then they said, well, theoretically, isn't Gloria Gaynor's album a 12-inch? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, it's all together at the beat, so it's a long 12-inch. And I went, I never thought of it that way, but you're right. You know, and I did it so, like I said, a DJ could go to the John or have lunch break or smoke. I mean, that's why I did it. There was no other reason. Because when you were playing a record, a 45, how can you go out and have a smoke in 3 minutes? So they had 19, 20 to do it. They had almost 20 minutes to do it. You know. When did the garage find me? Well, Mel kept asking me to go down there, and I knew Larry, and he'd always play my records. And he said, you know, you really got to hear it on the sound system. And, you know, if I was in Philly all week, that's the last thing I wanted to do was go to a club. You know, I wanted a couple days away from it, you know. So I'd go down there, you know, Tom, I got to have Little Sister. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, yeah, I know you mixed it. You can't, and you were supposed to destroy it, and I have a feeling you didn't. So I gave it to him, you know, but he wanted it. So he played it occasionally, he never gave it to anybody. So he kept his word. No, the Paradise Garage, I think, like I said, it's grown into it's like a myth now. And I think if Larry were here today, he would kind of laugh. The way they talk about Larry Levan now, he actually was standing on water when he was doing the turntables. I mean, he's so high and so unbelievable. And I refer to him as the Jimmy Dean of disco DJs, because he really did die too young, that's for sure. Oh, there'll never be another place like the Garage. There'll never be another DJ like Larry Levan. I agree with you, but let's bring it down to earth too, you know.
Tom, Can you give us your view on the Garage's relationship with WBLS and its legendary DJ, Frankie Crocker, the chief rocker?
Well, I think Frankie molded himself after a DJ who played on KGFJ in Los Angeles called Hunter Hancock. Hunter Hancock, when I'm talking about the 50s now, he would play soul records and R&B records, but he would be so sophisticated. And I mean, of course, when you'd see Frankie Crocker out, he'd always have like a blazer, a tie, cufflinks, the Gucci shoes. I mean, everything. He was like class all the way. And that's exactly how Hunter Hancock was. He would always, everything he played, even if it was like here is James Brown doing his. I mean, it was just, like, here's James Brown. He wouldn't be street, he'd be like very classy. And Frankie was like that too. Like everything he played was classy. First of all, he liked Larry a lot. He liked the way Larry played. And I think Larry and Frankie musically, Frankie didn't care what color it was. If it sounded like a great record, he'd play it, Larry was a lot like that too. I mean, he'd play a white country record, but he got to be kidding me. But if he liked it, and it would work, and and I like people that don't follow. They go in that uncharted territory. And unless you go there, you're going to be stuck in the same thing all the time.
DJ Larry Levan often played unexpected songs at the Garage, like Pat Benatar's Love Is a Battlefield. Do you recall that too?
Oh no, when I heard Love Is a Battlefield, I couldn't buy that record fast enough. I mean, the dancing part of it, remember, I know it's hard to, I talk about this every now and then, but people always say, well, you make disco records. And I go, why in God's name will you spend all that time and trouble to make a record and where you could really make it for everyone, but yet you want to make it for this little part here? And so you want to make it where no one else will understand it or enjoy it, but just so people can get up and dance to it. What happens if they want to play it low and have it a listening record too? And what about the lyric? The lyric might mean something too. And I've always said that. I said, why sell something short when you can, make it for the masses, but still keep it within the framework of making it a club record too.
I was listening to your remix of Jackie, You're a Star for West End Records from '76 the other day. I thought that would have sounded amazing on that Garage sound system.
Because I love that record. And I said, because I mixed that down in Philadelphia, and I brought the tape back. I gave it to Mel, so Mel has the tape.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you did your first remix?
How old was I? 32.
When Larry first started playing the Garage construction parties, he was only 21, very young to hold down that responsibility in New York in that era, don't you think?
Well, actually, when you think about it, I was kind of old. Yeah, because you think of new things, and disco was in a sense new. I wasn't a kid, like, oh yeah, let's, hey, But yet I felt like that. But I mean, I was still in my 30s, so. Because the other thing that bothered me with Larry is I think there were so many people hanging on to him to sort of like, they wanted to be dragged up with him. You follow me? I think a lot of times he got smothered.
Thank you to Tom Moulton for those insightful answers, plus indeed your time on this fine New York afternoon. And most importantly, thank you for the music. Too often the word legend is bandied about, but you, sir, are indeed a true legend.
Legends of the dance floor, a piece of paradise. Larry Levan's story.
A Piece of Paradise is very much about the Paradise Garage and its DJ Larry Levan, but it would be amiss for us not to mention everybody that played an important part in its creation and ongoing legendary status, like the master himself, David Mancuso of The Loft in New York City. He told us that the building of the reality took a village, and an entire village to create it. Thank you, Eddie Gordon, Michael Linder, Vince Aletti, Nicky Siano, Judy Weinstein, and Tom Moulton for their wonderful accounts. Tomorrow, we have the Levan and Crocker Take Over New York City show with 9 interviews from the movers and shakers of Manhattan. Thank you for listening to Legends of Dancefloor. I'm Lenny Fontana, and have a great night.